Welcome to Vices and Volumes. I'm your host, Avril Clinton Ford, and today I'm bringing you a very special episode. I'm at Castletown House in Kildare. Castletown is one of Ireland's most impressive Palladian houses, built in 1722 by William Connolly, the Speaker of the Irish House of Commons. Later it was home to Lady Louisa Conolly and her husband Thomas Connolly in 1758. Today we're discussing Lady Louisa, who's famously remembered for her artistic transformation at Castletown House and her immense charitable dedication to the local Celbridge community. So many of Lady Louisa's letters survive that offer us a full and interesting picture of her life, and I'll be speaking with Archivist Nicola Kelly today to find out more about Lady Louisa and her life at the fabulous Castletown House. Before I begin, if you love the podcast and you'd like to help support me, I have a Ko-fi account which allows you to donate the price of a coffee to me, which supports the software, the equipment and the books that I use, and it allows me to continue the podcast for as long as possible as I can without advertising. I'll add this to the show notes as well, but it'll also be in my socials, which are Vices and Volumes everywhere. I'm on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, YouTube and Threads. Please follow me for any updates, news, interesting content, and comment. Let me know what you think of the podcast and join the conversation. So here we are in the amazing archives room in Castletown House. Thanks so much for joining me on the podcast today, Nicola.
Thank you very much, Avril, for inviting me along to your podcast to chat about Lady Louisa and the archives here.
What does your role as the archivist at the OPW-Maynooth University Archive and Research Centre entail?
My role as archivist here at OMARC is quite varied. No 2 days are the same, but my day-to-day role can involve cataloguing and ensuring the long-term preservation of the country house archives that we care for here at OMARC. I also facilitate access to the archives to researchers, historians and students who make appointments with me to view material for their research. My role also often involves a lot of outreach activities as well. We often host talks and give tours of the archives here, especially for Culture Night, Heritage Week and other events throughout the year. I also share information of our collections on our social media pages to encourage users to come and access the archive. We also have a biannual newsletter that people can keep up to date with the activities here in the archive. It's called the OMARC Review, and you're able to view that online on our website, which I will share with you.
Oh, brilliant. I'll add that to the show notes, definitely. First of all, I suppose maybe you could tell us a little bit about Lady Louisa's life and her early life and how this all came about.
So I began cataloguing the letters not long after I began working here in 2017. So it was one of the first collections I catalogued as archivist here. And they're incredibly interesting. They span almost all of Louisa's life. There are 9 bound volumes of letters.
Oh my goodness.
Date from approximately 1759 to 1820. So almost her whole life. There are a little over 1,000 letters that were written to her younger sister, Lady Sarah Lennox. And then there are a couple of other family members that she writes to, including Emily, the Duchess of Leinster, her brother-in-law, James Fitzgerald, the Duke of Leinster, and her brother Charles, the Duke of Richmond. But the majority are to her younger sister, Lady Sarah Lennox.
Oh, that's kind of sweet. Can you tell us a little bit about Lady Louisa and how she came to be in Castletown House?
Well, Lady Louisa Conolly married perhaps one of the most eligible bachelors in Ireland, Thomas Connolly.
Good for her.
In 1759 at the age of 15.
Oh my goodness.
And Thomas was 21, which is not unusual for the time, but they were very well matched together. And it was a love match. She was quite infatuated with him, which she writes a great deal about in her letters. The letters document her marriage and her relationship with her husband, Tom Connolly, but also, her relationship with her wider family. It also documents very interestingly the decorative works carried out at Castletown House over a almost 30-year period, and they're incredibly interesting for us including my colleagues in the OPW, that they give us that timeline of the works being carried out. She describes in great detail works being carried out in the dining room, for example, the long gallery, her influences that cause her to make certain decorative decisions, which I'm looking forward to delving into later on. But they are an incredible evocation as well of life in the 18th century. You know, she discusses societal relationships with other peers and members of the aristocracy, and, you know, her relationship with her family as well. We have to remember that these were private letters. She gives often very colourful opinions about people in them, which are quite interesting to read through.
She wasn't really planning on us to be reading them this time later, anyone to be reading them outside of her own family.
I would say not.
Yeah.
No, I would say not. I think that would be a fair assessment.
So you mentioned as well the decoration of the house. So what do the letters tell us about her early life at Castletown and her relationship with James Fitzgerald, the first Duke of Leinster? Because I believe he was very helpful in the early years of her designing and commissioning work in the house.
Yes, so when Lady Louisa came here as a young girl, she married at the age of 15 and did need some help and guidance and influence in a lot of decision making. So she had quite a very, very close relationship with her elder sister, Emily, the Duchess of Leinster. And both Emily and James Fitzgerald, the first Duke of Leinster, had completely renovated their own home, Carton House. In several of Lady Louisa's letters, particularly from the 1760s, she actually describes works on the dining room being carried out, which for anyone going on a tour of the house, it's a spectacular room that we see now, designed very much in the Palladian style. This was initially 2 rooms done in an earlier 1720s, more fashionable style, and the Duke of Leinster recommended to Louisa that they knock the separating wall and make it a much larger, more fashionable dining room and dining space. And she discusses this in her letters, and she later mentions that the Duke and Duchess of Leinster are her first guests for dinner in their newly renovated dining room.
Oh, what an evening.
Yes. So we can definitely see from her letters these influences emerging in how these larger decisions are being made.
Yeah.
She also writes in great detail her own personal interests coming through and them influencing her decisions. For example, it was very fashionable in 1760s and 70s for people to be looking towards Greek and Roman architecture and artwork. So we see this emerging in the Long Gallery, stunning Greek and Roman paintings and carvings throughout the room, sculptures. You can see Pompeii being described, drawn on the walls in various artworks throughout the room.
Wow.
So there's quite a lot of Italian influence throughout the house.
So this was the time of the Grand Tour, so it would have been, everyone was kind of influenced by these Roman, Greek, Italian, as you say.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And for anyone who's witnessed the grandeur of the Long Gallery, and your eyes are immediately drawn to the Murano chandeliers that
they're
hang.
amazing.
They are absolutely spectacular.
Yeah.
So all of these influences are documented in her letters.
Wow.
She describes picking certain colours, the scarlet reds, the blues, gold trim covering around the room. This is wonderful to read all of these, like how she came about her decisions, and then being able to see the final results.
The finished work. And I believe those chandeliers took quite a bit of time to arrive as well.
Well, we can see why. I mean,
they're amazing.
I think the only word to describe them is singular. They are one of a kind, completely unique Murano glass chandeliers. They're the only kind in the world, and we're very lucky to have examples here.
Yeah.
But from what we know from the letters, Louisa was displeased with the colour of the chandeliers
really?
because they didn't quite match the colours she'd so carefully picked out on the walls. So you can imagine years and years of work and decision making, and it doesn't quite measure up, but I don't think she could send them back at this
No, but I
stage.
think every woman can relate to something not coming up right in the house when you
Yes.
think it's going to happen. Yeah.
So I think, there's quite a few instances like that where it's quite relatable. In a sense.
I can imagine. Yeah, it's bringing the human into it, I suppose. You mentioned before as well, we were talking about the Italian, it was the Stucco artist, Franchini, and some letters about him. You mentioned that to me before, and I thought it was very funny.
Yes, so Lady Louisa and Tom Connolly commissioned the famous stucco doors, the Franchini brothers, to complete the stunning stucco work that we now see in the entrance hall and the staircase here at Castletown. They depict the four seasons and they are incredibly intricate and detailed. The Franchini brothers had completed stucco work in nearby Carden, so Lady Louisa was influenced in that sense to have them come to Castletown to finish the entrance hall. But it's quite funny, there's a letter to her sister, Lady Sarah Lennox. She discusses her shock at the price that they've quoted her brother-in-law, and she says, if they give Mr. Connolly the same number, there will be a fine scold in his honour. So...
In other words, I'm not paying that.
No. But she did commission him to complete the now stunning entrance hall. We can see it was worth every penny.
It really is stunning.
So completely transformative for the entrance hall. But I don't blame her for being that moment of shock.
And we have to be frugal. Even if you do have massive dowries, you have to be frugal. So you've mentioned a number of times Sarah, her sister, and she's obviously got close relationships to her family. It seems that she was closest to Sarah. What kind of conversations would they have had back and forth?
The majority of the letters are to her younger sister, Lady Sarah Lennox. But of course, some of her other letters remain in other archives, but the majority that we have here are to her younger sister, Sarah. And they discuss in great detail over a long period. You have to remember they are written between 1759 and 1820. They span quite a long period of their lives from young women. But they go into great detail about life in 18th century Ireland in the Irish country house. But the majority deals with Lady Louisa and Sarah's relationship. And you can see their personalities come through in the letters and the very close friendship that they have. Louisa discusses in great detail society events, politics, art, music, but also personal events that come up.
And Sarah didn't have as easy, not necessarily easy, but Sarah had a more complex life, didn't she?
I suppose in a certain respect she did. The letters discuss Sarah's relationships, some major life events, including her marriage to Sir Charles Bunbury, and her also previous near engagement to the future King George III, which was quite an interesting life event or piece of information to come across in the letters.
And she was thrown over, wasn't she, versus somebody else, politically more so than thrown over?
Well, I suppose it very complex at this time, arranging matches and relationships and marriages.
Yeah, they were very much built on political strength as well as other things.
A great deal, which is actually discussed in the letters quite a lot. For example, in some of their earlier letters in the 1760s, Lady Louisa describes this possible relationship with the future King George III at a ball they've attended in 1760. She says, Lady Anne wrote that she has seen you, says you are the prettiest, genteelest and obliging creature she ever met with, and so civil, she is sure all the young men must be dying for love of you. Which is
sweet.
Which is very, very, very sweet and very supportive of her,
Yeah.
of her sister. And she writes this quite often, that Sarah is a society beauty. She's one of the most beautiful and eligible aristocratic women in their social circle.
Oh, well, she's all falling at her feet.
So, you know, she also notes that I hear the Duke of Marlborough is dying for love of you. Is that true? Prince Edward is, I hear, another humble admirer of your ladyship. You are a very fine lady indeed to have such a number at once.
Oh, my goodness.
So we can see both their personal sisterly relationship showing up here, a supportive relationship, but also that underpinning of a potential suitable and political matches being made.
Yeah, probably encouraging her a little bit.
A little bit.
Yeah.
And we see this come out, especially with Sarah's almost engagement to the future George III. Sadly, this match didn't come together because he was aligned with Princess Charlotte of Mecklenburg-Strelitz, a Prussian princess it was deemed to be a more suitable political match. And Lady Louisa writes about these frustrations in her letters.
Yeah.
And she says in a letter to her sister in July 1761, I was very sorry to read the Gazette Extraordinary last post. Perhaps it's that has vexed you, though. I think you never set your heart upon it much. I am sorry it is not a better alliance that we are to make, for I fear 'twill still draw on many wars in Germany. That says quite a lot about the...
So that she would have found out through the Gazette that she was not going to be the match then.
Well, in a more official term, but
Yeah.
I think she would have
So the
known
news is out.
before this. The news is out, which I can you can imagine was very difficult for Sarah and their extended family.
But she was a little protective of her sister as well, wasn't she? And she, supported her after that.
Certainly.
Yeah.
You can see that, again, that sisterly relationship show in their letters. She tries to comfort and support her. She remarks in later letters a month after this one, after the marriage of George III and Charlotte, she writes to Sarah, I long vastly to know what reception you came off with the day you went to see him. I shall also like to hear how he looks when Miss Charlotte arrives. I hear she has an ugly nose and a wide mouth, but is fair. Which is, I feel like it's quite something very sharp to say.
Yeah.
But it's said in a tone of her trying to comfort her sister, which I think many of us can relate to, but I found it quite...
An ugly nose and a wide mouth, isn't it?
Yeah, which is a very unfortunate depiction of Princess Charlotte, but it's said from a place of being a protective older sister.
Yeah, he wasn't good enough for you anyway.
Yes. But it's amusing then when Sarah is later asked to be a bridesmaid at the royal wedding, which Louisa is not very pleased about, I'm putting it nicely.
Yeah.
She writes, we shall certainly not go to the coronation. I should not propose much pleasure in it. I am glad you are to be the bridesmaid, if you like it. And also observing later, Mr. Connolly loves you of all things and bids me to tell you that he thinks you should by no means have accepted being bridesmaid, as he think you ought to have resented such behaviour.
Oh, so they're all circling around her going, you don't need to do this.
Yes, they're all very, very supportive, which again supports, well, my personal view that she had a very warm and close relationship with her younger sister and, was a guiding figure for her in many respects.
Yeah.
Because there was a couple of years of an age gap. So she's being very supportive here.
Yeah, and you can almost hear the household conversation of her husband and her in the room going, I can't believe you threw her over. And now they're inviting us to the wedding. You can almost see, you can always imagine this discussion of her pacing up and down the drawing room, annoyed, and him going, she shouldn't have to go.
A little bit. You can only imagine it comes across a little bit in the letters about this kind of maybe tumultuous personal time in their lives.
So you mentioned earlier as well that Sarah married Sir Charles Bunbury.
Yes, thankfully I can say Sarah did eventually marry Sir Charles Bunbury, which we get a sense that her wider family weren't very happy with the match. He wasn't quite as wealthy or politically connected as wider members of the Lennox family. But they initially had a very happy marriage, and Louisa writes to Sarah saying, "My sister Caroline says you will be married in about 2 months. How generous and good she was to you in giving your wedding clothes." And she's quite excited to hear about these wedding plans, and they discuss them in the letters. But unfortunately, they didn't actually have a very happy marriage. And Sarah actually had an affair with Lord William Gordon, which later led to a divorce in their marriage. This is only touched on a little bit in the letters, so we know it was perhaps quite a tumultuous and strenuous time for the family, because it was documented quite a lot in society letters and papers about this divorce, which was quite long and drawn out by the time she actually divorced in 1776. But I can happily say she did marry again, or she found love again, with George Napier. She had a very happy long marriage to him and had 8 children. They lived or split their time between London and Celbridge, and you can see this from the letters. She writes very lovingly about her new husband, which is quite a happy ending to see come about.
Yeah, that sounds lovely. But while her sister had 8 children, didn't Lady Louisa struggle to have children herself?
Lady Louisa and Tom never had any children together themselves, which you can see is quite a sad point for Louisa. She often writes about this in her letters. In one instance, she discusses her sister Emily, the Duchess of Leinster, having her 13th child.
Oh, good Lord.
And being somewhat distressed about this. She writes at the age of 21 that, "I fear my breeding days are over."
Oh my God, she's only 21 and saying that.
Yes, a very young woman.
Yeah.
But we have to remember, for women in aristocratic circles in the 18th century, it was almost expected that you would have children. So this was quite a point of tension for Lady Louisa. She documents this throughout her letters.
Yeah, it's bad enough that you can't have kids, but everyone's looking at you as well.
You know, reading the letters, you can see how distressing it is for her. But I will say, throughout her letters, she discusses very close relationships with her nieces and nephews. For example, one of Sarah's younger children, Lady Sarah's younger children, Emily Napier, spends a great deal of time here, and Louisa spoils her, treats her like her own. She actually writes in several letters about having a little, very young Emily Napier, a toddler, in her boudoir as Louisa is getting dressed, and she writes that she delights in it. So she is such a good-natured child, and she plays with my things, with my dressing clothes. And she also discusses bringing little Emily to be fitted for dresses, and you know, it's quite a sweet relationship that she has with her nieces and nephews.
Yeah.
And they tend to spend a great deal of time here. We can see from her letters that she kind of informally adopts some of her nieces and nephews, and she describes this in great length in her letters, which is very sweet to read. And actually, in some of her later letters in the 1780s, she describes her husband's nieces and nephews coming to live here permanently, the Staples children, who come to live at Castletown after their father dies. So they come from Lisson House in Northern Ireland.
Oh, yeah.
And Louisa describes again in great detail her relationship with these children. At one point, she describes commissioning a very elaborate decorative watch for Harriet Staples in the 1780s, which she describes as being made of gold and being set with 89 rose diamonds.
Oh my God.
And very, very elaborate, but also very personal. She describes silk tassels being intertwined with 3 of the Staples children's hair, and then a locket of her own hair being set in the centerpiece. So very, very elaborate piece of jewellery. And we actually have a description in the letters and even a small drawing that she sends to Sarah for this watch. And she writes, "We intend to spoil her," which I think is 89 rose diamonds.
That's proper spoiling.
That is on the excessive end of spoiling. But you can just see this very close relationship that she has with her nieces and nephews.
So the house wasn't, because you kind of think this is she can't have children, the house wasn't an empty place. It was a place of constant comings and goings.
No, it was a very active house. She also often describes music and dancing and the types of entertainment that they had in Castletown, which was very interesting to read, even just from our own historical research of the house. So in one case, she actually describes the Staples children in the long gallery, one playing the guitar at one end of the house, people eating at the other end, people dancing in the middle of the long gallery, a lot of activity, a huge amount of activity happening. She also describes other forms of 18th century entertainment, which are really interesting as well, and the connections she has at this time. In one case, she describes 18th century entertainment very humorously in her letters, comparing Irish and Parisian forms of entertainment. She says, "In our long gallery, we often have card games, music, theatre, but I much prefer our entertainment here. The parties in Paris are so dull, for they have no cards and indeed no men."
Oh my goodness.
So she definitely much prefers her own style of entertainment here.
Yeah.
So, I mean, just from the letters alone, it is a bustling hive of activity that's being described.
So you can see that like her early life then was the renovations, and then the midlife then is this whole family oriented busyness, entertaining and all that kind of stuff. Did you find anything, interesting or curious that you hadn't expected or come across before?
Yeah, actually, there's one letter in particular that stands out to me, and that is from the later 1760s, where Lady Louisa describes a coffee room here in Castletown. Just in one sentence, but it stands out quite a bit. She recalls a conversation with Lady Hertford to her younger sister Sarah, and Lady Louisa writes to Sarah saying, "And the other circumstance of my not having children, she does not like me at all. That the fact that we have a coffee room here," which you may miss on first glance, but further research, when I looked into this further, we discovered that a coffee room existed in Castletown roughly from the late 1760s until at least 1780. Some of the account books for Castletown House in the 18th century, there are several excerpts which mention alterations being made to a coffee room, a new lock and key for the coffee room, several of these mentions of this coffee room. And in one single architectural drawing for the house in 1780 lists a coffee room being in what we now know as the Brown Study, which was from an earlier period of the house in the 1720s.
Oh my goodness.
Unfortunately, we know very little about it other than these few excerpts, but it's quite an unusual feature to see a coffee room mentioned in a house like Castletown. Coffee rooms appeared very frequently in cities like Dublin, London, etc. in the 18th century, but were deemed to be entirely male spaces and were certainly not suitable for women. They were places to discuss politics, business, etc. They definitely weren't deemed to be suitable places in an aristocratic private home like this.
Yeah. It's funny, actually, I was recording another podcast recently, and it's coffee houses I mentioned about men competing on speeches and how they talk to each other, but they'd be talking about two totally different things. There'd be no conversation. They'd just be talking at each other. So you can imagine these rooms, this coffee room thing being very male and very uncouth almost in some cases.
Yeah, well, I think the fact that Lady Louisa writes in her letters that Lady Hertford, quote, thinks our having a coffee room here shocks her prodigiously, says a great deal.
It says a great deal about what coffee houses or coffee rooms would have been.
Yes, and then in the same letter, in 1769, she writes that, and the other circumstance of my not having children, she does not like me at all.
Oh my goodness.
Quite a brief statement, but it says a great detail about 18th century society, social mores, and what was expected of women during this period.
She certainly was doing things the incorrect way as far as her peers would be concerned.
Well, I've been looking at other historians' research. Coffee rooms were certainly male spaces, so it's unlikely that Lady Louisa had designed and implemented this room in her house, but you know, the way it's mentioned in her letters, she receives certainly unkind words from her peers.
It's fantastic. That's a fantastic piece of information to find and to spot it, because you could easily just gloss over that. But it's spotting the coffee room thing, going, wait a minute, that's almost scandalous. I like that.
It was a really interesting piece of information to come across.
I'd say so.
Again, this is one of the many invaluable things about the letters, that they tell us so much about the house and the people who lived in them. We know a great deal from research being carried out on the house by architectural and decorative historians, but these snippets of personal information really bring all of that together.
No, absolutely. And you mentioned as well, I think we were talking before, that she was quite political as well, and she really understood politics. And you mentioned before to me about the 1798 rebellion.
Yes, she actually discusses politics quite a great deal, especially in her later letters from the 1770s onwards. She goes into great detail about discussions in Parliament. Her husband Tom was an MP. She would have been hearing about political happenings at the time from both her husband and her reading papers, the society papers, but she discusses them quite a great deal in her own letters. Some of her earlier mentions include the American Revolution. For example, in 1777, she writes, "The French war frightens me and certainly must have serious consequences. In the present miserable state of all our own affairs, I don't know which will suffer most. God help them all as one can say." Her personal opinions about it, which are quite interesting to read, contemporary opinions here. But she later discusses the 1798 rebellion in great detail, because we know her nephew, Lord Edward Fitzgerald, was involved in and later executed for his involvement in the rebellion, which she documents in great detail, especially events happening in Kildare, but throughout the country. For example, she describes Castletown being transformed into a garrison, writing, 18 soldiers sleep in our drawing room and defences are established in Celbridge. There are 80 men at Celbridge and 300 at Leixlip, the conjunction of which I hope will make a stand sufficient against them. She later describes, there is a skirmish at Kilcock, having happened this morning, where the rebels were disappeared, 100 men and their general killed. And she carries on this description in her letters in great detail for weeks. She also writes, an attempt to keep a journal of the rebellion, too full of misery to continue it. A company of the Cork militia quartered at Prosperous had their sentinels killed, upon which the insurgents rushed into the place where the soldiers lay and destroyed their officer and themselves by murder and fire. Which is quite harrowing to read her own description and depiction of this.
It's been really scary as well for, to be, you're in the centre of this, like there's Celbridge, Kilcock, Prosperous.
Yeah, and even then she describes, I suppose, her own personal connection to the rebellion. Her nephew, Lord Edward Fitzgerald, who she was very close to, is arrested and later executed for his role in the rebellion. And she describes, quite sadly, being unable to see her nephew as he awaits jail while he's arrested. She writes that she has written to Lord Cornwallis and Lord Castlereagh to apply in favour of the widow and children of their brother, Lord Edward Fitzgerald, but she's unsuccessful, unfortunately, which is quite sad to read here.
She would have seen this young lad grow up at her house probably as well. This is her family, and a family who went at the kind of the other side.
Yes, she describes in great detail how this has affected her sister Emily, the Duchess of Leinster, and being just a very emotionally distraught period for their family. So they're, those letters are quite emotionally charged at times. She describes that trying to visit Lord Edward in prison at the jail and saying that the guard, or as she describes him, the brute would not let me see my dear Edward. Which is quite sad to read.
So she never got to see him, but so he's gone through this process, he's been arrested, and she never got to see him before he was executed.
No, very sadly not. And she describes her sadness in them about not being able to see him before his
dreadful.
death.
Yeah. God, you really feel for her there. And she had also, just in the household, I think we spoke before, she'd also a bit of support from another character. And I believe her painting is hanging up in one of the rooms here. She's the housekeeper. Yeah.
Yes, Louisa actually mentions the servants on a number of occasions in her letters, but she writes in particular about having a good relationship with the housekeeper, Parnell Moore, and looks to the housekeeper for guidance during her early years in Castletown. There's a portrait of her in the butler's pantry here at Castletown, but Louisa also mentions her in her letters, saying she is the greatest housekeeper there ever was. And that's in 1760. So Louisa is a young girl of 16. So you can imagine she's still figuring things out as the new chatelaine of such a grand house. So it's wonderful to see those relationships as well come through in the letters being described. Unfortunately, we know very little about some of the other servants in the house, but we do see a couple of names that crop up. She also describes another lady's maid, Nellie, who she describes as being a very sweet and pleasant girl.
Oh.
So from her letters, we know that she had a very good and close relationship with many of the servants working here. It's really lovely to read about those relationships too.
Yeah, because those people sometimes can disappear into obscurity in the bigger story. And so it's nice to have at least a few of them mentioned.
Absolutely, and it's important for us as well to hear about the relationships below the stairs, not just those above or upstairs.
Yeah.
That we get a full picture of life in the big house.
Oh my goodness, it's amazing. So in her later years then she shifted a little bit more. Her life is in, I suppose, almost seems like three phases. Is again, she starts off with the renovations, then she has her kind of middle, a lot of family stuff. But then she changes things and she starts to care for Celbridge a bit more and the community.
Yes, we see from her later letters there's a complete shift and kind of a refocus of her energies, what she's spending her time on. And we really see this coming about after the death of her husband, Tom Connolly, in 1803, which is quite sad to see that she writes about his death in her letters, and then there's a gap in between when she starts writing again. So she does go through a period of loss. For example, in a letter to her brother Charles, the Duke of Richmond, she writes to him the day after Tom dies, and she says, The suffering from the asthma latterly diminished the last 2 days. I have reason to hope we're quite lulled. No apprehension disturbed his dear mind, at peace with itself. Oh, my dearest brother, what a day I have lived to see, when my heartstrings were torn from me.
Oh, God. Jesus, that'd bring this tear to a glass eye. That's really sad.
So it's, it's very, very, very sad to read. And you can see then a shift or a refocus of her energies. She spends the latter or the last years of her life very much focused on philanthropy and charity works. We have in the archives one of her personal account books, a small notebook, where she documents from 1804 to 1820 donations that she makes to several charitable funds, including the poor of Celbridge. She also funds a school in Celbridge as well to teach children from all classes, trades, and she entirely funds the education of younger children in Celbridge.
It seems she recognised that the poor were on, I suppose, a knife edge compared to everyone else.
That certainly comes across. We see in some of her later letters in 1814 that she writes about the foundation of a school in Celbridge, writing, I pleased myself with the thought that I had children from Catholics and Protestants and varying classes, that they would be mixed as they should be, growing up together in their childhood, in all probability will make them grow up with cordiality towards each other. And she also writes on the improvement of women's education and prospects, funding them to be educated in knitting, weaving, practical skills that they could use in later life. And she says, whereby these women, I will tell them how they might earn a little industry, showing a woman that she might earn 2 shillings a week without interfering with her other business. She also describes in the same year establishing a school of industry, which is erected on the site of Tom Connolly's kennels, just inside the gates of Castletown, near the main street in Celbridge. She writes that, I will dedicate my winter to open my school, which opened about 2 months ago, and she hopes to encourage certain principles at the school, particularly that the poor ought to be the first care of the rich. The labouring class are the most populous in all countries. It is through their bodily labours that the productions of the earth be had, and justice calls for their receiving that share of them that is necessary for their maintenance. So she wants to dedicate her time to these charitable causes and improving life for local people in Celbridge and also those working on the estate. So that really takes up the majority of her discussions in her later letters.
Amazing.
This entire shift in focus.
Yeah, it's amazing. I think those words are very strong as well. It kind of shows you that she genuinely understood the position of the poor and she genuinely cared, which is, it's very remarkable.
So that was quite interesting to read these letters and another side of Lady Louisa Conolly, which I think a lot of people would be interested to read about.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're coming to the end. We've covered a huge amount here, but I have a couple of quicker questions, short questions for you. So the first one is, what would you love the world to know about Louisa that you know? Who's the real woman behind the letters?
I suppose from my own reading of her letters that she was a thoughtful and caring person, that she cared a great deal about her family. Like the majority of her letters are centred around family life, that she was certainly supportive of her sisters and brother and her extended family. That comes through instantly and makes her as a person relatable to us, even though we are centuries apart and worlds apart, that she is a relatable person in many respects, that she cared a great deal for the people, those around her that were closest to her.
That's really lovely, yeah. And did you ever read any letters or any of them stands out in your mind as your favourite? Is there a particular quote that stands out to you?
There's actually one in particular that is quite simple in a sense. Lady Louisa just describes a beautiful day in Castletown when both her and Tom are finally settling into life here, and works are near finished, and she seems to be enjoying the house more. So it's one from 1764, and she writes a beautiful description of Castletown where she says, "I'm sitting in an alcove in my cottage with a porch before it in the wood, 3/4 of a mile from the house. A lovely fine day, the grass looking very green, honeysuckles and roses in abundance. My flowers are now coming up in the natural ground. At this moment I am as happy and pleasant as I can be."
Oh.
Which I'd quite love that description. It's really beautiful and simple, but you can just tell how happy she is.
Yeah, you can see her
here.
kind of reflecting on its contentedness.
Yeah, and it just comes through how much she loved this place, how much she loved Castletown and what it meant to her.
That's so sweet. So from immersing yourself in Castletown's history and this era, what have you learned that might give us a perspective on today's world?
I think from reading these letters, it tells me a great deal about how the way we communicate with each other has changed. When you see that she wrote over 1,000 letters to one sister alone, you can only imagine when you multiply that by how much she was writing to other members of her family in great detail.
Yeah.
We certainly don't do that really anymore. We communicate in a very, very, very different way, and it just goes to show how much communication has changed over a period where we mostly text and phone call now, but our communication is not quite as well documented. I highly doubt Lady Louisa expected someone to be reading through her letters almost 250 years later. I imagine she never expected her private correspondence to be read through and researched and studied in as great detail as it is today.
Yeah, I seriously doubt she expected that. It's funny, my mother used to say to me when I was younger, and I think this is coming from the day of diaries and letters and that as well, is don't put anything down in writing that you don't want read out in public. But I suppose we're glad that she did, because otherwise we wouldn't have all of these amazing letters, all this amazing information.
We certainly wouldn't have her own insights and perspectives on 18th century life, the works she carried out for what we know today.
Yes.
That visitors see when they take a tour around the house. So we're very, very lucky to have the letters here in our care. They tell us so much about the Connollys, their life here on Castletown.
It's amazing. It's great. It's lovely to have that. But I suppose my last question then, and it's completely unrelated and a personal question, is I ask because I collect old books from the 1800s, which is a mad and expensive hobby. Do you have a similar hobby? And what's your favourite thing of your hobby?
I also love books and reading. It has to be said, I've lost count how many books now. I've only started counting how many bookcases I have. So that's where
we don't count them. We don't talk about how many there are.
We don't. I think maybe one niche thing I'm interested in are brooches. Most recently, I started collecting 19th century.
Cool.
One recently, I was able to acquire a 1820s lover eye brooch, which I absolutely love as a piece to add to my collection, and I wear them. I don't just keep them in a box
that's lovely.
somewhere. They're meant to be. These are meant to be worn.
Do you stitch them onto the clothing? Because I'd be terrified I'd lose one.
I'm terrified too. But it's something I'm personally interested in. It's women's jewellery.
Yeah.
So I've become quite interested in collecting those. Everything from Art Deco pieces as well, from the 1920s and 30s right up to 1970s costume jewellery. So I really enjoy that.
Oh, that's lovely. I think anyone who does anything slightly remotely related to history ends up with some obsession and collection that costs them a fortune.
Sadly, yes.
Oh, that's brilliant. Well, before we go, where could everybody else find some more information on Lady Louisa, Castletown House, and maybe some other information on the family themselves? Any resources?
Well, the Archive and Research Centre is open here by appointment. You can find out more information on our website, maynoothuniversity.ie/OMARC.
Brilliant. I'll put that in the show notes.
We share information about our collections on our social media pages, which I'll share.
We'll get all those as well. And we'll have everything in the show notes. Yeah.
I would also invite people, if they haven't been, to visit Castletown. It really is a wonderful place, and we're very lucky to be based here as a centre that cares for country house archives. We are perfectly situated.
Oh, it's a fantastic place, and I highly recommend that everyone comes and visits. And now there is the parking is available now as well. And if you also bring your dog, the walk is amazing. Beautiful walks around the place, yeah.
Absolutely.
And also drop into Celbridge, fabulous coffees. There's a coffee van here as well. So it's a good day out for the whole family.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time to meet with me today and share all this lovely information with everyone.
Well, thank you very much, Avril. I really enjoyed being a guest on your podcast. So thank you very much.
Super. Well, hopefully we'll have you again soon.
Thank you.
Creating this podcast is a genuine joy for me, and knowing that you're out there listening and engaging with these stories makes it all worthwhile. If you haven't already, please subscribe to Vices and Volumes on Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen, and consider leaving a rating or review. It truly helps the show. You can also follow along on Instagram, Facebook and TikTok at Vices and Volumes, or visit vicesandvolumes.com for more information. And please reach out and let me know what you think. I love hearing from you. Thank you for being a part of this journey.